The planet had been dead for 10,000 years, and Emily Park knew this the moment. She stepped off the shuttle and felt the ash crunch beneath her boots. She was a small woman with tired eyes and hair she had not brushed in 3 days, because the journey from Earth Station 7 had been long and boring, and she had spent most of it reading old books about dead languages that nobody cared about anymore. Nobody except her Lieutenant David Kim walked beside her, and he was the opposite of Emily in almost every way. He was tall and broad, and his uniform was always perfect, and his hand never left the gun on his hip. He did not read books about dead languages. He read tactical reports and threat assessments, and he thought Emily was slightly crazy for volunteering for this mission. The planet was called Sigma-7 in the official records, but the crew of the USS Perseverance had started calling it the grave, because that is what it looked like, a grave for an entire world. The sky was gray, and the ground was gray, and everything was covered in a fine powder that might have been ash, or might have been dust, or might have been the remains of whatever had lived here before something burned it all away. Captain Michael Park, who was no relation to Emily, despite sharing her name, had told them the history during the briefing. 300 years ago, humanity had joined something called the Galactic Collective, which was a fancy name for a club of alien species who had decided not to kill each other anymore. The collective had records going back millions of years, and in all those records, there was one thing that every species agreed on. The precursors were gone. They had been the first intelligent species in the galaxy, or at least the first ones powerful enough to matter. They had built things that modern science could not explain, and they had fought a war so terrible that it had killed them all and burned dozens of worlds down to nothing. Sigma-7 was one of those worlds. Emily did not care about the war. She cared about the language. The precursors had left behind writing on some of the ruins that survived, and nobody had ever been able to read it. The collective had tried for millions of years and failed, and Emily thought that was the most interesting puzzle in the entire universe. She had spent her whole life studying languages that nobody spoke anymore. She had learned Latin and ancient Greek and Sanskrit and a dozen others that existed only in old books and museum displays. Her professors had told her this was a waste of time. Her parents had told her to study something useful. Her friends had stopped calling because she never wanted to talk about anything except dead words from dead cultures. But Emily did not care, because she knew something that other people did not understand. Languages were not just words. They were windows into how people thought and felt and saw the world. When a language died, something irreplaceable was lost forever, and Emily believed that if she could just learn enough dead languages, she might start to see patterns that connected them all. That was why she had volunteered for this mission when the collective announced they had found something new on Sigma-7, something buried deep underground that their sensors could not identify. The walk from the landing site took 2 hours, and Emily was breathing hard by the end, because the air was thin and her legs were not used to exercise. David was not even sweating, which made her dislike him a little bit. They found the entrance at the bottom of a crater that might have been natural or might have been made by a weapon. Nobody could tell anymore. It was a door, not a cave or a tunnel or a crack in the ground, but an actual door made of metal that had somehow survived 10,000 years of neglect. It was 3 times taller than David and covered in symbols that made Emily stop breathing for a moment. She had seen precursor writing before in photographs and holographic reconstructions, but never in person. The symbols flowed like water frozen in mid-motion, and they seemed to shift when she looked at them from different angles. David said something, but Emily was not listening. She walked forward and touched the metal, and it was warm under her fingers, which should have been impossible on a dead world with no sun worth mentioning. The symbols were beautiful in a way she could not describe. They made her think of music somehow, as if they were meant to be sung rather than read. Her translator implant buzzed in her ear and displayed a single word on her retinal screen. Unknown. She almost laughed, the most advanced translation technology in the galaxy, and it could not even begin to understand these symbols. David touched her shoulder, and she jumped because she had forgotten he was there. He pointed at his wrist display, which showed a message from the Perseverance. The captain wanted to know if they had found anything worth reporting. Emily looked at the door, and then at the symbols, and then at the ash-covered sky above them. She told David to tell the captain that they had found something, but she was not sure yet if it was worth reporting or if it was going to change everything. The door opened 2 days later. Emily had spent those days scanning every symbol and sending the data back to the ship where Dr. James Song, the chief linguist, was running it through every translation matrix they had. He was having no more luck than her translator implant, but he was enjoying the challenge. David had spent those days being nervous and checking his gun and walking the perimeter of the crater, looking for threats that did not exist. The door opened because Emily accidentally leaned on a symbol that turned out to be a button. She felt very foolish about this, but also excited, because it meant the technology still worked after 10,000 years. The inside of the vault was dark until Emily stepped through the doorway, and then lights began to turn on one by one, revealing a corridor that stretched deeper into the ground than her scanner could measure. David wanted to wait for backup. Emily did not want to wait for anything. They compromised by David going first with his gun drawn, and Emily following close behind, trying not to trip over her own feet as she stared at the walls. There were more symbols everywhere, and Emily began to notice patterns. Some symbols repeated more often than others, and some seemed to be grouped together in ways that suggested sentences or maybe equations. The corridor ended in a chamber so large that the lights could not reach the ceiling. Emily stood in the doorway and felt very small. In the center of the chamber, there was a machine. It was shaped like a person, if that person was 4 meters tall and made of metal that seemed to absorb light rather than reflect it. Its arms hung at its sides, and its head was bowed, and its eyes were dark circles that looked like they had once held something bright. The surface of the machine was covered in symbols, the same flowing script that decorated the door and the walls, but more dense and more complex, as if someone had tried to write an entire book on a single body. Emily walked toward it because she could not help herself. David shouted for her to stop, but she did not listen. She reached the machine and looked up at its face and felt something she had never felt before, a recognition that made no sense because she had never seen this thing before, and yet some part of her brain was insisting that she knew it. Somehow, then she saw the light deep inside the machine's chest behind layers of ancient metal. There was something glowing, a soft pulse of amber that beat like a heart. Emily stepped back and bumped into David, who had followed her despite his fear. The machine was not dead. The machine was sleeping. And as they watched, the pulse grew stronger, and the dark circles where its eyes should be began to flicker with the faintest hint of amber light. David grabbed Emily's arm and tried to pull her toward the exit. Emily did not move. She was watching the machine and thinking about all the dead languages she had ever studied and wondering if this was what it felt like to find a speaker. The machine's eyes opened fully and looked directly at her. Neither of them moved. Then, the machine spoke in a voice like stones grinding together and distant thunder rolling across an empty sky. It said one word, a word that sounded like a question, a word that Emily somehow understood, even though she had never heard it before. The machine said daughter, and Emily felt the entire universe shift beneath her feet. The word echoed through the chamber, and Emily stood frozen in place, with her heart pounding so hard she could feel it in her throat. David had his gun pointed at the machine, but his hands were shaking, and Emily knew that whatever weapon he carried would do nothing against something that had survived 10,000 years underground. The machine's eyes were fully open now. 2 circles of amber light that seemed to look not just at Emily, but through her, as if it could see something inside her that she could not see herself. It spoke again, and this time the words were longer and more complex, but Emily still understood them. Somehow, even though they were not in any language she had ever learned, the machine said, "You speak the old tongue." Emily opened her mouth to respond, but no words came out. She had spent her entire life studying how to communicate, and now, when it mattered most, she could not find anything to say. David was talking into his communicator, calling for backup and extraction, and probably a lot of other things that involved weapons and soldiers. Emily was not paying attention. She was staring at the machine and trying to understand how she could understand. She had not spoken. She had not said a single word since entering the chamber. The machine had called her daughter and told her she spoke the old tongue, but she had not spoken at all unless Emily thought about this for a long moment while the machine watched her with those ancient glowing eyes. Unless the machine was not listening to her words, unless it was listening to something else. She took a step forward, and David grabbed her arm and told her to stop, but she shook him off. She needed to know. She needed to understand. Emily stood before the machine and looked up at its face and thought very carefully about what she wanted to say. She did not speak out loud. She just thought the words as clearly as she could. "Can you hear me?" The machine tilted its head in a gesture that looked almost human. "Here. You daughter of the builders, you carry the echo of those who made me." Emily felt dizzy. She sat down on the dusty floor because her legs would not hold her anymore. David was beside her, asking if she was hurt, asking what was happening, asking questions. She could not answer because she did not understand any of this herself. The machine watched them both, but it only spoke to Emily. "You are confused. This is natural. Much time has passed, the builders are gone, but their children remain. You are proof of this." Emily finally found her voice. Her real voice, not the one in her head. "What are the builders?" The machine was silent for a moment, as if considering how to answer. "The builders were the first. They made the stars bright and the worlds green. They made machines like me to protect what they had created. And then the Devourers came and the war began and everything burned." David had stopped trying to call for backup. He was listening now with his gun lowered and his face pale. "The war," Emily said. "The precursor war of the machine made a sound that might have been agreement or might have been something else entirely. That is what you call it now. We called it the ending. But it was not an ending, not completely. The builders knew they could not win. They knew the Devourers would destroy everything they had made, so they hid what they could. They scattered pieces of themselves across the young worlds, hoping that someday something would grow from the ashes." Emily thought about Earth, about the long, slow climb from caves to cities, from stone tools to starships. Humans had always believed they had done it alone, that they had pulled themselves up by their own strength and cleverness. What if that was not true? What if something had helped them along the way? "You are saying," Emily stopped because the words felt too big for her mouth. "You are saying that humans are descended from the builders." The machine turned its head to look at David and then back at Emily. "Your bodies are not, your minds are not, but something in you carries the echo. Something in the way you think and speak and dream. The old tongue lives in you, even though you do not know it. This is why you can hear me. This is why I called you." Daughter Emily stood up slowly. Her legs were still weak, but she needed to be standing for this. "What am I supposed to do with this information?" The machine did not answer immediately. Instead, it began to move. The motion was slow and careful, like someone waking up after a very long sleep. Joints that had not flexed in millennia creaked and groaned. Metal plates shifted and resettled. The amber light in its chest grew brighter. David raised his gun again, but Emily put her hand on his arm and shook her head. The machine took one step forward, and then another. Each movement seemed easier than the last, as if it was remembering how to walk. "I have been waiting," the machine said. "I was placed here to guard this vault and to wait for the children of the builders to find me. The war is not over. The Devourers were not destroyed. They were only driven back, and they will return." Emily felt cold. A deep cold that had nothing to do with the temperature. "When I do not know, time means little to me, but I can feel them. The echoes of Their machines are growing stronger in the spaces between stars. They are waking, just as I am waking. And when they come, they will try to finish what they started. David finally spoke, and his voice was steadier than Emily expected. Can we fight them? The machine turned to look at him with those amber eyes. You are small and young, and your weapons are primitive. You would not survive a day against the devourers as you are now. Then we are doomed. David said no. The machine took another step forward until it stood directly before Emily. You have something the devourers do not have. You have me. Emily looked up at the ancient machine and felt something shift in her understanding. She had come here looking for a dead language, and instead she had found a living weapon. What do you want from us? She asked. The machine knelt down so that its face was level with hers. The amber eyes were so close now that she could see her own reflection in them. I want you to speak for me. Daughter, I was built to end wars, but I cannot act without a voice to command me. The builders made me this way so that I could never be used for evil without the consent of the innocent. I need someone who speaks the old tongue to tell me what to do. Emily thought about her life up until this moment, all the dead languages she had learned, all the books she had read, all the people who had told her she was wasting her time. She thought about Earth and the billions of humans who had no idea that their entire existence was connected to an ancient war they had never heard of. She thought about the devourers waking up somewhere in the darkness between stars and coming to finish what they had started 10,000 years ago. Emily looked into the machine's amber eyes and made a decision. Okay, she said, I will speak for you. The machine stood up, and the amber light in its chest blazed bright enough to fill the entire chamber. Then we have work to do. Daughter, the war is coming, and we must be ready behind them. David holstered his gun and let out a long breath. He had signed up for a simple archaeological survey. This was going to be much more complicated. The news spread through the Galactic Collective like fire through dry grass within hours of Emily's first report reaching the Perseverance. Every major species in the collective had demanded answers. The High Council called an emergency session, and Ambassador Rachel Lee was summoned to explain what the humans had found. Rachel was a tall woman with gray hair and a face that showed no emotion, even when she was terrified inside. She had spent 30 years negotiating with alien species who thought humans were primitive and dangerous, and she had learned to never let them see weakness. But standing before the council, now she felt very small. The chamber was vast and filled with representatives from 100 different species. Some looked almost human, others were so strange that Rachel's eyes hurt when she tried to focus on them. They all had one thing in common, though. They were afraid. Counselor Dex spoke first. His body was made of living crystal that shifted colors based on his mood, and right now it was flashing an angry red. The precursors were extinct, he said. His voice came through Rachel's translator as a harsh buzzing sound. This is established fact. They destroyed themselves and nearly destroyed the galaxy with them. Nothing could have survived. Rachel kept her voice calm and steady. With respect, Counselor, the evidence suggests otherwise. Our xenolinguist, Dr. Emily Park, has made contact with an artificial intelligence that claims to be of precursor origin. It responds only to humans, and it speaks a language that our translators cannot identify. Another counselor spoke up. This one looked like a cloud of smoke with eyes. Why would it respond only to humans? Your species is young. You have no connection to the ancient times. Rachel had asked herself the same question. She did not have an answer she liked. We are still investigating. However, the machine has indicated that human language, specifically the language known as English, contains elements of what it calls the old tongue. We do not understand how this is possible, but the machine is certain the chamber erupted into chaos species that had not spoken to each other in centuries. Were suddenly shouting over one another. Some demanded that the machine be destroyed immediately. Others wanted to study it. Others wanted to use it against their enemies. Rachel stood quietly and waited for the noise to die down. It Took a long time finally. Counselor Dex raised one crystalline arm and the chamber fell silent. If what you say is true, Ambassador, then humanity is either the greatest discovery in galactic history or the greatest threat. We cannot allow you to control a precursor weapon without supervision. Rachel had expected this. We are not trying to control anything, Counselor. We are trying to understand. Dr. Park has established a rapport with the machine, and we believe she may be able to learn more about the precursors and the war that destroyed them. This knowledge could benefit the entire collective. The Smoky Counselor drifted closer to Rachel's platform, or it could destroy us all. The precursors built weapons that could crack planets in half. If your people learn to use such things, what guarantee do we have that you will not turn them against us? Rachel met the counselor's many eyes without flinching. You have our word. The counselor made a sound that Rachel's translator interpreted as bitter laughter. The word of humans. You have been part of the collective for 300 years. In that time, you have started 4 wars, developed weapons. We specifically banned and violated more treaties than any other species in our history. Your word means nothing. Rachel felt her calm slipping, but she held onto it with both hands. She thought about Emily down on that dead planet, talking to a machine that had seen the birth and death of civilizations. She thought about all the humans who would never know how close they were to being either heroes or monsters. Took a breath and spoke very carefully. Then do not take our word. Come and see for yourselves. Send your scientists and your observers and your soldiers if you want. Watch everything we do and judge us by our actions, not our history. We have nothing to hide. The council murmured among themselves. Counselor Dex looked at Rachel for a long moment. His crystal body had shifted to a deep purple that she could not interpret. Very well, Ambassador. We will send observers, but understand this. If your species attempts to weaponize the precursor technology without our approval, we will consider it an act of war against the collective, and we will respond accordingly. Rachel nodded. We understand. She left the chamber and walked through the corridors of the station until she found a quiet corner where no one could see her. Then she leaned against the wall and let herself shake back on Sigma 7. Emily was having her own problems. Machine, which had begun calling itself the Keeper, had been explaining things to her for hours, and the more she learned, the less she understood. You say humans carry the old tongue in our language, Emily said. How is that possible? We evolved on Earth. Our languages developed independently over thousands of years. The Keeper stood motionless in the center of the chamber. Its amber eyes never blink. Language does not evolve independently, daughter. Every word you speak carries echoes of words that came before. The builders did not create your language. They planted seeds that grew in ways they could not predict, but that still contained traces of what they were. Emily shook her head. That is impossible. We have records going back tens of thousands of years. We know how our languages changed and merged and split apart. None of them have any connection to alien sources. Keeper made a sound that might have been a sigh. You are thinking too small, daughter. Language is not just words. It is patterns. It is rhythms. It is the way thoughts become sounds and sounds become meaning. The builders did not give you words. They gave you the shape of words, the structure of meaning itself. Emily sat down on a piece of rubble and tried to process this. Dr. James Song had been listening from the doorway. He stepped forward, now his face showing the same confusion. Emily felt tar. You saying that the basic structure of human language was designed by the precursors? That our grammar and syntax are not natural developments, but engineered features? The Keeper turned to look at him. I'm saying that the builders understood something. Your species is only beginning to grasp consciousness and language are not separate things. They are two aspects of the same phenomenon. When you speak, you are not just moving air. You are shaping reality itself. The builders learned to do this deliberately. They built me using the same principles, and they passed those principles to their children so that one day someone like her, the Keeper pointed at Emily, could wake me from my sleep and speak the words that would allow me to act. Emily stared at the keeper and felt something clicking into place in her mind. All those years studying dead languages, all those patterns she had noticed, all those connections between tongues that should have had no connection. She had thought she was just seeing coincidences. What if she had been seeing the fingerprints of the builders all along? David came running into the chamber, and his face was grimly. "Have a problem," he said. "The collective is sending observers. That is the good news. The bad news is that our long-range sensors are picking up something else, something coming from outside collective space." The keeper's eyes flashed brighter. "They are coming. The devourers have sensed my awakening. They will try to destroy me before I can become operational again." Emily stood up and felt fear and excitement mixing in her chest. "How long do we have?" The keeper was silent for a moment. "Days. Perhaps hours. I cannot be certain. Time is difficult for me now." Emily looked at David and then at James and then at the ancient machine that held the key to humanity's forgotten past. "We need to work faster," she said. "Keeper, I need you to teach me everything you can about the old tongue. Every word, every command, every piece of knowledge you have. If the devourers are coming, I need to be ready to speak for youth." Keeper's amber eyes met hers. "Are you certain, daughter? The knowledge I carry is not easy to bear. Many who learned it before you were destroyed by its weight." Emily thought about all the dead languages she had learned. All the lost voices she had tried to bring back to life. She had trained her whole life for exactly this moment. She just had not known it until now. "I am ready," she said. "Teach me." The keeper bowed its head. "Then let us begin." The attack came 3 days later. Emily had not slept. She had not eaten much either. She had spent every waking moment in the chamber with the keeper, learning words that hurt her throat to speak and concepts that made her brain feel like it was being stretched in directions it was not meant to go. The old tongue was not like any language she had ever learned. It did not just describe reality. It interacted with it. Every word had weight and consequence. Every sentence was a kind of action. When she spoke the old tongue correctly, she could feel something respond, something deep in the fabric of existence itself. It was terrifying and wonderful, and she understood now why the keeper had warned her about the weight of knowledge. But she did not stop. She could not stop. The devourers were coming, and she was the only one who could give the keeper a voice. Captain Michael Park had brought the Perseverance down from orbit and landed it as close to the vault as the terrain would allow. The crew had spent the 3 days fortifying their position and running drills and trying not to think about what was coming. The collective observers had arrived too, a dozen ships carrying scientists and soldiers from a dozen different species. They had set up their own camp a kilometer away and watched everything the humans did with suspicious eyes. None of that mattered when the black ships appeared. David was the first to see them on his tactical display. 3 contacts, he reported. His voice was steady, but Emily could see the fear in his eyes. Emerging from fold space at the edge of the system, Captain Park was already giving orders. "All hands to battle stations. Power up weapons and shields. Signal the collective fleet. We need everyone." Emily stood at the entrance to the vault and watched the sky. The black ships were still too far away to see with the naked eye, but she could feel them somehow. A pressure in her mind like a headache that would not go away. The keeper had told her this would happen. The devourers and their machines broadcast a kind of psychic interference designed to cause fear and confusion in their enemies. It was working all around her. Humans and aliens were scrambling to their positions. Some were shouting orders. Others were praying to gods Emily had never heard of. The fear was thick enough to taste. Emily walked back into the vault. The keeper stood in the center of the chamber where it had stood for 10,000 years. Its amber eyes tracked her as she approached. "They are here," Emily said. Yes, the keeper did not sound afraid, but then it was a machine. 10,000 years of waiting had probably burned away anything like fear long ago. Emily looked at the console that had risen from the floor 3 days ago. The interface. The keeper needed to become fully operational. It was covered in flowing script that she could now read, though the words still made her head swim. "I do not know if I am ready," she admitted. The keeper bent down to look at her. "You are not ready. No one is ever ready for war, daughter. But you are here, and you are willing. And that is enough." Emily wanted to believe that. She was not sure she could. The first explosion shook the ground beneath her feet. Outside, the battle had begun. Captain Park was shouting into his communicator, coordinating the combined human and collective fleet against the 3 black ships. 3 ships did not sound like many, but the Devourers did not need many. Their technology was old in the same way the Keeper was older than the collective, older than any species still living. They moved in ways that should have been impossible, predicting attacks before they were launched, adapting to weapons faster than the targeting computers could compensate. The Perseverance fired its main guns, and the beams passed through empty space where a black ship had been a fraction of a second before a collective cruiser tried to ram one of the enemy vessels, and the black ship simply folded itself around the impact point, absorbing the blow without damage before unfolding again and tearing the cruiser apart with weapons that looked like frozen lightning. David came running into the vault with blood on his face from a wound. Emily could not see. "It is bad," he said. "We are losing ships faster than I can count. Our weapons are not doing anything." Emily looked at the Keeper. "Can you help?" The Keeper stood motionless. "I can, but you must speak the words." "I cannot act without a voice." Emily walked to the console and placed her hands on its surface. The metal was warm, almost hot. She could feel something pulsing beneath it, like a heartbeat. The Keeper was ready. All it needed was her. She opened her mouth to speak the activation command, and then stopped. "What will happen?" she asked. "What exactly will you do when I give you a voice?" The Keeper turned its amber eyes toward Harry. "We'll do what I was built to do. I will end the threat." "That is not an answer," Emily said. "I need to know. Are you going to kill them? Are you going to destroy those ships and everyone on them?" The Keeper was silent for a moment. "The Devourers destroyed everything the Builders created. They burned worlds and murdered billions. They will not stop until every trace of the Builders is gone, including you and your species. Is their destruction not justified?" Emily thought about this. She thought about all the dead languages she had studied, all the cultures that had vanished from history, all the voices that had been silenced forever. She thought about what it meant to be the last speaker of a language that no one else remembered. "The Builders are gone," she said. "They have been gone for 10,000 years. The Devourers destroyed them, but the Devourers are still here, which means the Devourers won. The Builders lost. Everything they built and everyone they loved is dust now, and all their weapons and all their knowledge could not save them." The Keeper did not respond, so maybe Emily continued. "Maybe the answer is not to do what the Builders did. Maybe the answer is to do something different, something they never tried." David was staring at her like she had lost her mind. "Emily, there are 3 ships out there killing our people right now. This is not the time for philosophy." Emily ignored him. She looked at the Keeper and spoke very carefully. "I will give you my voice, but I am not going to tell you to destroy them. I'm going to tell you to stop them, to protect us without becoming what they are. Can you do that?" The Keeper stood motionless for a long moment. "Builders never asked me that. They only ever asked me to destroy. I am not the Builders." Emily said, "I am their daughter. Remember. And daughters do not always do what their parents did." Another explosion shook the vault. Dust fell from the ceiling. Emily did not look away from the Keeper's eyes. Finally, the Keeper spoke. "It will be harder. To stop without destroying requires more precision, more control, more of myself. But yes, daughter, I can do what you ask. If that is truly what you want." Emily placed her hands flat on the console and felt the pulse beneath her palms. The old tongue words rose in her throat, words that had not been spoken in 10,000 years. She thought about all the people who had told her that studying dead languages was a waste of time. She thought about her mother who had wanted her to be a doctor, and her father who had wanted her to be an engineer, and all the friends who had drifted away because she cared more about ancient words than modern life. She thought about how strange it was that all of that had led her here to this moment, to this choice. Then she opened her mouth and spoke. The words poured out of her like light, like fire, like music. She did not even know what she was saying, only that it was right. The console blazed with amber light, and the keeper began to change. Its body unfolded, expanded, transformed into something vast and terrible and beautiful all at once. Metal plates shifted and rearranged, revealing weapons that had not been used since. Before the collective existed, the amber light in its chest spread outward until the whole machine was glowing, and then the keeper rose up through the vault, through the rock and ash, and dead soil up into the gray sky of Sigma 7. Emily followed it with her eyes until she could not see it anymore. Then she collapsed to her knees and let David catch her before she hit the ground. The last thing she heard before unconsciousness took her was Captain Park's voice coming through the communicator. His words were soft and filled with wonder. What in all the heavens is that? The battle lasted 17 minutes. Emily was unconscious for most of it, but David told her what happened later in the medical bay of the Perseverance while doctors checked her vital signs and asked questions she could not answer. The keeper rose into the sky like a small sun. Its body had expanded to nearly 100 meters tall, and it moved through the air as if gravity was merely a suggestion. It reached the black ships in seconds, crossing distances that should have taken minutes. The black ships in seconds, crossing distances that should have taken minutes. The devourers tried to run. They did not make it. The keeper did not destroy them. Not the way it could have. Not the way it had been designed to. Instead, it reached out with weapons that had been built to crack planets and use them with surgical precision. It disabled the first ship's engines with a single beam of light that punched through shields as if they were not there. The ship tumbled through space, helpless but intact. The second ship tried to fight back. Its frozen lightning weapons struck the keeper again and again, but the ancient machine did not even slow down. It grabbed the second ship in hands, made of metal and force fields, and simply held it still until the weapons overheated and shut down. The third ship fled. It made it halfway to the edge of the system before the keeper caught up with it. A single pulse of energy, and the ship was drifting powerless, its crew alive, but trapped 17 minutes to defeat an enemy that had been destroying collective ships like they were made of paper, and not a single devourer was killed. David finished his story and looked at Emily with eyes that she could not quite read. The collective observers recorded everything he said. They have already sent reports back to the High Council. I do not think anyone knows what to do with this information. Emily sat up slowly. Her body ached, and her throat felt like she had swallowed broken glass. But she was alive. What is the keeper doing now? Pointed out the medical bay window. Emily looked and saw it. The keeper had shrunk back down to its original size. It was standing on the surface of Sigma 7 near the entrance to the vault, waiting. She could see the amber glow of its eyes. Even from orbit, it is waiting for you, David said. It will not talk to anyone else. Emily nodded and pushed herself off the medical bed. The doctors protested, but she ignored them. She had work to do. The walk to the shuttle bay felt longer than it should have. Her legs were weak and her head was pounding. But she kept moving, one foot in front of the other. Just like always, David walked beside her, and for once, he did not try to talk. He just stayed close in case she fell. They took a shuttle down to the surface, and Emily stepped out onto the ash-covered ground of the dead world. The keeper turned its head to watch her approach. Daughter, it said, your voice gave me purpose again. I am grateful. Emily stopped a few meters away and looked up at the ancient machine. I did not want you to kill them, she said. I hope that was the right choice. The keeper was silent for a moment. The devourers on those ships will be prisoners of the collective. They will be studied and interrogated, and eventually they will die of old age in cells far from their home. Is that better than destroying them? Emily thought about this. I do not know, she admitted, but it feels different. It feels like we chose something instead of just reacting. I think that matters even if I cannot explain why the keeper bowed its head. The builders would not have understood this choice. They were creatures of certainty, of absolute decisions. They saw the devourers as enemies to be eliminated, and so they built me to eliminate. But you see something else. You see possibility even in those who would destroy you. Emily smiled, even though it hurt. Maybe that is the difference between parents and children, she said. Parents build the world. Children have to live in it. The High Council session 3 days later was unlike anything in collective history. Ambassador Rachel Lee stood before the assembled representatives with Emily beside her. The keeper had been allowed to address the council through a holographic link, its amber eyes glowing on the massive display screen. Counselor Dex spoke. First in his crystal body was a swirl of colors Emily did not recognize. We have reviewed the evidence, he said. The precursor machine is genuine. The threat it defeated was genuine. And the manner of that defeat was unprecedented. He turned to look directly at Emily. You had the power to destroy those ships completely, to eliminate the Devourer threat forever. Why did you choose restraint? Emily had thought about this question for 3 days, and she still was not sure she had a good answer. Because destruction is easy, she said. Anyone can destroy. The builders could destroy better than anyone, and it did not save them. The Devourers are still out there, still waking up, still coming for us. If we destroy every ship we encounter, we learn nothing. We just become what they are. The smoky counselor drifted forward. And what are you instead? Emily looked at the holographic image of the keeper. We are inheritors, she said. The builders left something in us, whether they meant to or not. They gave us their language, or at least pieces of it. They gave us the ability to wake the keeper and speak for it. But they did not tell us what to say. That choice is ours. And I choose to build instead of destroy, to protect instead of attack, to find answers instead of just winning fights. The council chamber was silent. Then Counselor Dex made a sound that Rachel's translator interpreted as reluctant respect. 300 years, we have watched your species with suspicion. We have seen you make weapons and break treaties and behave in ways that frightened us. But this is something we did not expect. He looked at Emily with all his crystalline eyes. Perhaps we judged you too quickly. Perhaps there is more to humanity than war and ambition. Perhaps this inheritance you speak of carries something worth preserving. Ambassador Lee stepped forward. We are not asking for special treatment, Counselor. We are asking for partnership. The Devourers are coming. That is certain now. The only question is whether we face them together or alone. The council voted that night for the first time in collective history. They voted to form a unified defense force with humanity at its center. Not because humans were the strongest or the smartest or the most advanced, but because humans had something no other species possessed. A connection to the ancient past and a choice about the future. 6 months later, Emily stood on the surface of Sigma 7 and watched the first students arrive at the new Precursor Studies Institute. They were young and nervous and excited, and they had no idea what they were getting into. The keeper stood beside her, smaller, now compressed into a form that could walk among humans without terrifying them. Do you think they are ready yet? Asked Emily, watched a young woman trip over her own feet, trying to read a datapad while walking. Her friends laughed and helped her up, and they all continued toward the institute doors. Together now, she said, they are not ready. None of us are ready. Then, why do you smile? Emily turned to look at the keeper with eyes that had seen 10,000-year-old secrets and survive. Because ready is not the point, she said. The builders were ready. They had all the knowledge and all the weapons and all the preparation anyone could want, and they still failed. She looked back at the students. These kids are not ready, but they are curious. They want to learn. They want to understand. And when the Devourers come again, and they will come again, that curiosity is going to matter more than all the weapons in the galaxy. The keeper considered this. You truly believe that Emily thought about all the dead languages she had learned, all the voices she had brought back from silence, all the connections she had found between Peoples and cultures that should have had nothing in common. I believe that language is the most powerful technology ever invented, she said. Not because it lets us describe the world, but because it lets us imagine new ones. The builders gave us their words, but they could not give us their imagination. We have to provide that ourselves. The keeper was silent for a long moment. Then it did something Emily had never seen before. Laughed. The sound was strange and mechanical, but unmistakably laughter. The builders would have hated you, it said. They believed in order and control and certainty. They would not have understood your chaos, your creativity, your stubborn refusal to accept the way things are is. That a compliment the keeper's amber eyes glowed. Right, it is the highest compliment I can give, daughter. You are nothing like the builders, and that is exactly why you might succeed where they failed. Emily smiled and looked up at the gray sky of the dead world that was slowly coming back to life. The language was extinct, she said, but the words survive. And as long as the words survive, the story is not over. The keeper stood beside her and watched the students disappear into the institute. No, it agreed the story is not over. It is only beginning above them. The stars shone cold and distant and full of possibilities. And somewhere out in that vast darkness, the devourers were waking up. And somewhere closer than anyone knew, the children of the builders were learning to speak. The war was coming. But for the first time in 10,000 years, someone was ready to choose something other than destruction. Emily Park walked toward the institute to begin her first lecture. She had a lot to teach, and the universe had a lot to learn.